Chapter 1. The Romanovs' Departure and Their Legendary Wealth. In the waning days of the Russian Empire, a train bearing the American flag departed Tsarskoye Selo under a veil of secrecy. On board were the former Tsar, Nicholas II, his family, and a select group of attendants and armed guards. The departure was orchestrated by Alexander Kerensky, head of the provisional government, who kept the operation hidden from journalists, Soviet officials, and foreign diplomats alike. Even the Romanovs remained uncertain of their destination, hoping for sunny Crimea, but clues in their baggage, warm clothing and provisions for 5 days, hinted at a far harsher fate. Deep Siberia awaited, a place no member of the Romanov line had ever been sent. The journey itself was a spectacle of lost grandeur. The family's baggage weighed a staggering 46 tons, comprising exquisite garments, fine furniture, and sacks overflowing with jewels. Such opulence would have overwhelmed any modern registry, and upon arrival in Tobolsk, local merchants seized the opportunity, raising prices astronomically for their royal patrons. At this moment, the Romanovs were still, by many measures, the wealthiest family on earth. Estimates of Nicholas II's fortune reached $395 billion in modern value, making him wealthier than any contemporary magnate. Yet this wealth, accumulated over 3 centuries, was shrouded in secrecy, built not only in the open through palaces and pageantry, but also through a vast financial empire invisible to the public. Over the course of their reign, the Romanovs amassed treasures through official and unofficial means. Until the era of Peter the Great, the distinction between personal and state property was blurred. The Tsar was the sole proprietor of the nation, with the treasury serving as his personal wallet and the land as his vast domain. Peter's reforms introduced a demarcation, separating imperial pocket money from state funds and creating a system under which the Romanov fortune operated for centuries. Most imperial income arrived as gifts and tributes, especially in the time of Peter, when 4/5 of the Tsar's revenue flowed in this way. Later, monarchs indulged extravagantly. Empress Elizabeth owned 15,000 gowns and reportedly changed attire thrice each evening. An accounting system was absent. Spending followed the whims of power and fashion. Catherine the Great brought jewelry and artwork by the crate, and Paul I established annual allocations and trust funds for royal heirs, though restrictions on foreign investments were often ignored. From birth, Romanov children were richer than nearly all their subjects, their wealth growing through maternal deposits and golden gifts at baptism. Over generations, accounts and securities swelled, but land remained the crown jewel. Millions of hectares stretched across Russia, encompassing mines, factories, and whole cities. Legends claimed Nicholas II personally owned 70% of the empire, an exaggeration, yet the Romanovs were indisputably the largest landowners. Luxury defined the Romanov era. Daily life was dictated by ritual and tradition, with staff handling purchases and the family barely touching cash. In-person shopping was considered improper and even dangerous, and abroad, the Romanovs spent freely, oblivious to prices. The collapse of the monarchy, however, would render such wealth useless. As revolution swept through Russia, assets were seized, accounts frozen, and the family forced to account for every ruble. This chapter, then, marks the transition from unimaginable privilege to sudden uncertainty. The Romanovs' centuries-old empire, secured by privilege and myth, crumbled almost overnight. The once mighty house of Romanov set out on an unthinkable journey, not at the height of their power, but into the shadows of exile, leaving behind a legacy of opulence evaporated by political upheaval. The story of their departure is not just a tale of lost fortune, but the end of an era defined by the wealth and mystique of the Imperial Dynasty. For centuries, Russia's imperial world revolved around a single idea. The Tsar was not merely the ruler, but the owner of the land and every treasure upon it. Laws before the 17th century blurred state and personal property. Palaces, fields, and even the treasury were the Tsar's possessions, inherited with the crown. The empire's resources changed hands with the succession, consolidating Russia's vast wealth under the throne. This structure began to shift under Peter the Great's reign. With a vision of modernization, Peter established the cabinet, a financial institution separating crown funds from state money for the first time. Royal pocket money and government accounts were now distinct, and careful record-keeping replaced tradition. Yet ancient customs lingered. Superiors across the empire sent gifts and tributes to the sovereign, and nearly 80% of Peter's revenue was drawn from these gestures. Peter himself spent little on personal luxury, saving resources for war and state projects. Later Romanovs, however, indulged in splendor without limit. Empress Elizabeth's legendary 15,000 gowns and her ritual of changing outfits multiple times each night epitomized the age. Imperial finances, awash in wealth, remained largely unregulated, no systematic accounting, only the whim of courtly desires. Growing extravagance led to new taxes, such as the salt tax, which was promptly redirected to imperial expenses. Courtly spending often strained even royal purses. Catherine the Great's annual allocations eclipsed those of her predecessors, and debt became a familiar companion. Her spending on diamonds and art was matched only by her ability to borrow funds from favored officials and relatives. In the 19th century, financial reforms emerged. Paul I established annual family budgets, regulated inheritances, and set officers to monitor investments and gifts. Birth brought Romanov infants immediate fortunes, entrusted to caregivers until maturity. The practice nurtured a dynasty where each member, from childhood, enjoyed immense privilege and wealth. More than cash, the Romanovs clung to their land. Millions of hectares, hundreds of estates, and entire towns formed their empire. These holdings remained central even as industrialization grew, supplementing banking and securities which filled family accounts with millions. Still, the family's economic management struggled to keep pace with change. The reforms of Alexander II, especially the emancipation of the serfs, profoundly reshaped imperial finances. Having once received most resources without question, the Romans now faced payroll for thousands of employees, saw agricultural revenues decline, and watched deficits grow. Financial oversight became necessary. Baron Karl Kister unified management under the ministry of the imperial court, introducing strict bookkeeping, freezing payments, and imposing real limits for the first time. Detracting from feasts and courtly excesses, Kister modernized financial tools. Part of the imperial fortune was invested on the St. Petersburg Stock Exchange and in government bonds, while new sources of income emerged from industrial holdings and public debt. The Romanovs transformed from traditional land magnates into contemporary investors, collecting growing dividends and quietly shaping the Russian economy. Yet as bureaucracy and transparency replaced absolute control, the dynasty became more vulnerable. Political storms and social upheaval exposed weaknesses that years of privilege had masked. When revolution came, carefully maintained structures collapsed, fortunes vanished overnight, and the royalty's invisible empire dissolved in the face of history. Imperial finances evolved from personal whim and unlimited opulence into a rigid, modern system, reflecting and ultimately succumbing to the inexorable advance of Russian society and change. The journey from sovereign ownership to bureaucracy underlined the shifting fate of the dynasty and the nation itself. Chapter 3. Family, lavish spending and economic reforms. For generations, the Romanov family lived as the absolute lords of the Russian realm, a dynasty whose rituals and habits were shaped by extraordinary wealth. Within palace walls, opulence flourished and traditions echoed the grand scale of imperial privilege. From birth, Romanov heirs were enveloped in luxury. Newborns received gifts of gold rattles and diamond insignias, and by their christening, their accounts were already swelling with maternal capital and trust funds, enough to employ entire retinues of servants. Even as children, the members of this legendary family possessed fortunes far greater than the vast majority of their subjects. Their everyday lives moved to a rhythm of gifts, ceremonies, and seasonal spending. Empresses adorned themselves with thousands of extravagant gowns, and the family's reputation for generosity meant that each staff member, from coachmen to chambermaids, expected lavish bonuses, gold watches, and even luxury items for holidays and birthdays. Maintaining such standards was essential for the family's image, but it also strained their finances. Despite the seemingly endless flow of money, individual Romanovs sometimes found themselves penniless, and children were taught the basics of financial literacy, tracking expenses and drawing up budgets under the watchful eye of their tutors. Even so, for the Romanov dynasty as a whole, resources once seemed limitless. Well into the 19th century, the family's assets, cash, jewelry, securities, were dwarfed by their greatest possession: land. Millions of hectares, hundreds of estates, and entire cities lay in the Romanovs' portfolio. By the early 1900s, some rumors claimed Nicholas II personally owned 70% of Russian land, a figure exaggerated but illustrative of their unrivaled status as landowners. Their holdings extended from urban palaces to remote Siberian territories, encompassing factories, mines, and agricultural lands. The monetary value of imperial properties reached tens of trillions in today's rubles, placing even Europe's oldest dynasties in the shadow of Romanov power. This tradition of extravagant spending and land ownership encountered its first great test in the Reform era. The emancipation of the serfs and the rapid changes of the mid-1800s forced the family to rethink economic practices. Palace staff now required regular payment, and massive estates had to be restructured. Many struggled to adapt, falling into debt or relying on informal loans from relatives. Even the Tsar himself became a family credit card, with relatives appealing for help with lavish hotel bills and private debts. Marriages and kinship further complicated the family's finances. Strategic matches brought foreign influence and occasionally international business partnerships. Princesses and empresses lobbied for contracts. New ventures, factories, commercial projects, even confectionaries, were launched, but often failed or required rescuing from the family fortune. Some royal ventures, like the famed Standard Yacht or the Hermitage's magnificent art collections, became symbols of imperial pride but rarely generated profit. As the empire entered the 20th century, new management structures and finance ministers attempted to rein in excess. Family budgets were calculated, pay frozen, and the Ministry of the Imperial Court enforced oversight. Investments in stocks and bonds joined the portfolio, and even the most lavish ceremonies were pared down. Still, tradition and status demanded the appearance of limitless generosity, a golden cage from which the Romanovs could not escape. The outbreak of World War I and mounting revolutionary pressures pushed the system to the edge. Empress Alexandra, foreseeing disaster, strategically acquired diamonds for her children and transferred assets to foreign accounts. But the war made these moves perilous. As fortunes evaporated and the revolution exploded, the Romanovs were forced to count every ruble, hiding jewels, selling assets, and facing an unprecedented loss of control over their long-held wealth. By the time their rule collapsed, the Romanov family had transformed from rulers whose expenses shaped state policy to a scattered clan struggling to retain remnants of their glory. Some succeeded in salvaging treasures abroad. Others, like Baron Fredericks, the last great financial steward, ended their days in poverty, haunted by the memory of vanished luxury. Thus, the Romanov story continued, a tale of spectacular family ritual, reckless spending, and the inexorable march of reform and decline. The dynasty's fate reminds us that even the deepest wells of wealth can run dry, leaving behind only shadows of ceremony and the fragments of a lost world. Chapter 4. Business, Assets, and International Investments. The Romanov dynasty's influence extended far beyond the glittering halls of its palaces. Generation after generation, imperial fortunes grew, woven with threads of land, industry, and global ambition. By the dawn of the 20th century, no other noble house in Europe could rival the extent of Romanov land ownership. Millions of hectares swept across the Russian heartland into Siberia, the Altai, Poland, and Ukraine. In these lands stood factories, mines, and entire towns, economic veins pumping life into the empire's treasury. Industrialization reshaped the dynasty's economic role. Mines yielded gold, coal, and precious metals. Sugar refineries and textile mills refined the products that fed Russian cities and villages. The family maintained control by appointing trusted managers and stewards, men who juggled ledgers, brokered deals, and negotiated contracts between branches of the imperial clan. Disputes and risk were inevitable. Ventures launched by enterprising princesses, confectionery businesses, art studios, even rare import shops, often needed to be bailed out by family wealth. Land remained the dynasty's greatest asset, yet true visibility lay in their collections and investments. Palaces such as the Winter Palace and Catherine Palace housed diamond rooms filled with ancient jewels, royal regalia, gold and silver service sets. Rembrandt and Raphael canvases hung in secluded galleries. Fabergé eggs, miniature marvels of enamel, gold, and precious stones, lay hidden in safety vaults, their stories tangled with imperial legend and secrecy. The Hermitage, ballet theaters, and libraries flourished under the dynasty's patronage, radiating Russian culture to the world. The Romanovs were quick to adapt to global finance. Despite laws restricting foreign investment, family assets quietly flowed into banks in London, Paris, Berlin, and Geneva. Anonymous accounts accrued dividends from Turkish war reparations, bonds, and railway shares. International investments offered both security and risk. In turbulent times, diamonds and gold were transferred abroad with the utmost secrecy. Diplomatic pouches ferried wealth. Train cars departed under cover of darkness. As revolution loomed, defensive maneuvers grew desperate. Jewelry and precious stones were sewn into clothing, valuables spirited into European cities via secret compartments. Soviet authorities, in their quest to obliterate imperial wealth, nationalized factories, seized properties, and hunted for hidden stores. The fate of the dynasty's treasures became a global saga. Museum directors in Paris, collectors in London, and jewelers in New York bid at Soviet auctions for imperial artifacts. Fabergé eggs, royal diamonds, and gold regalia changed hands, their provenance unspoken but understood by connoisseurs and historians. Some Romanov heirs found refuge and resources in exile. Treasures sold on the European market sustained family members for a generation, but most faced dire straits. The grandeur of palaces replaced by modest apartments, stories of lost privilege haunting their new lives. Those who remained in Russia saw royal holdings fragmented and erased, palaces repurposed, and business empires dissolved in bureaucracy and revolution. The economic legacy of the Romanovs endures in the fragments scattered across continents. Palaces now house museums, ballet companies thrive on past patronage, and diamonds auctioned decades ago still evoke the allure of lost imperial luxury. The history of Romanov business and assets remains a testament to the ambition and reach of the dynasty, powerful, perilous, and ultimately ephemeral in the face of historic upheaval. As business collapsed and investments vanished, memory became their last currency, fueling fascination for a world built by imperial vision and undone by revolution. Chapter 5. The Collapse of the Monarchy, Revolution and Loss. The Romanov dynasty, once surrounded by grandeur and security, encountered its darkest hour as the Russian Empire tumbled into chaos. Years of slow decline exploded into revolution and violence, ending 3 centuries of majestic rule in mere months. The February Revolution upended the royal order. Nicholas II's abdication marked an unprecedented transfer of power and a swift dismantling of privilege. The imperial family, formerly masters of palaces, treasures, and staff, were confined in Tsarskoye Selo, their world reduced to anxious isolation. The provisional government, determined to break with the past, dispatched officials and soldiers into former royal residences. Echoes of footsteps and distant commands replaced the laughter of courtiers. Government commissions, armed with inventories and decrees, methodically counted and repossessed imperial wealth. Palace vaults yielded jewels, Fabergé eggs, and rare icons. Treasured artifacts wrapped in velvet were stacked with paintings and silver plate, awaiting confiscation. In desperation, members of the dynasty and their loyal servants buried jewels in rose gardens, hid gold coins in secret panels, and concealed diamonds within everyday objects. Many caches were never found, their locations lost to the turmoil of revolution. Bolshevik ascendancy shattered all remaining security. Armored convoys escorted by Red Guards prowled palace grounds, enforcing nationalization and dispossession. Palatial estates echoed with the silence of loss. Staff were dismissed, and family allowances erased from government ledgers. Court silver was melted down, paintings moved to state museums, and family heirlooms auctioned in distant cities. Aristocrats who had lived in opulence now queued for bread and fuel, watching inflation erode savings and dignity. Attempts at escape intensified. A few Romanovs, drawing upon fragile diplomatic networks, managed to transfer jewels and letters across borders, their secrets guarded in diplomatic pouches or hidden in the seams of winter coats. Some found safe passage to Europe through sympathetic officials, but most faced disappointment, confinement, and poverty. Palaces became prisons, and fading hope colored every day. The fate of Nicholas II, Alexandra, and their children encapsulated the dynasty's tragedy. During the final months, the family was transferred under guard to Ekaterinburg. Surveillance was relentless, communication restricted. Rooms grew cold and silent as negotiations for asylum faltered. On a stormy July night in 1918, the last Tsar and his family were executed, an act justified by the nationalization of their belongings, leaving the past to silence and legend. The revolution reached beyond Russia's borders. Soviet authorities held auctions in Paris, London, and Berlin, dispersing the treasures of Romanov palaces to to financiers, collectors, and museum curators worldwide. Fabergé eggs, imperial jewelry, and icons became objects of fascination, passed from revolutionary agents to connoisseurs and institutions. Each artifact whispered of a vanished world, its origins etched in gold and tragedy. For those who survived, exile became a life dominated by memory and adaptation. Fragmentary wealth sustained some Romanov heirs, but many struggled with obscurity and loss. The collapse erased family titles, scattered generations, and left the culture of Imperial Russia as a series of symbolic fragments: letters, photographs, auctioned art, and fading legends told across continents. The destruction of the monarchy was not merely an episode of political upheaval, but the unraveling of a civilization's material legacy. The ruins of palaces and the presence of Romanov diamonds in foreign museums testify to the finality of revolution and the ephemeral nature of dynastic power. The Romanovs' fall resonates as a warning and a remembrance. Privilege and heritage, once thought invincible, can be swept away and scattered by the unpredictable tides of history. Chapter 6. Aftermath, Exile, Legacy, and the Fate of Romanov Treasures. The collapse of the Romanov dynasty sent shockwaves not only through Russia, but across the world. When the last Tsar abdicated, the web of imperial assets, palaces, land, galleries, jewels, was torn apart, scattered between Soviet seizure, desperate escape, and the uncertain hands of fate. Surviving family members melted into exile, leaving behind the grandeur of imperial life for the anonymity of foreign cities. Grand duchesses and princes who once graced the gilded halls of St. Petersburg struggled to adapt, often forced to sell cherished heirlooms simply to survive. The treasures conveyed out of Russia were rarely vast, sometimes only a single Fabergé egg, a modest velvet pouch of diamonds, or a faded family photograph. Secret channels carried valuables through diplomatic pouches. Loyal servants stashed gems in mundane objects or monastery walls. In memoirs and letters, stories endure of cocoa tins and chirpy porcelain dogs used as hiding places for Romanov diamonds. In Russia, the new government scoured palaces and monasteries, uncovering hidden caches, silverware, paintings, rare jewels, and documents. Much went to finance the rapid industrialization under Stalin, but just as much vanished into private hands or the maze of Soviet bureaucracy. Soviet auctions in Paris, Berlin, and London transformed the Romanov legacy. Imperial eggs were sold to European royalty. Diamond tiaras went to magnates. Icons and portraits migrated to the museums of the West. Only a fraction ever returned. Today, Russian museums display just 21 Imperial Fabergé eggs. The rest remain scattered in collections from London to Monaco, Qatar, and beyond. 6 Romanov eggs have never been found, their fate a persistent mystery. Nobody can say with certainty how much money and treasure the Romanovs left abroad. Some sources claim billions were deposited in London and Berlin, originating from war indemnities and secret bonds. Rugged rumors still swirl about lost fortunes and anonymous accounts, enriching the mythology of the dynasty's disappearance. Most banking records were lost or destroyed. Oral histories and careful research offer only glimpses into the scale and reach of imperial wealth. Yet, for all the vanished gold and jewels, the most enduring Romanov legacy is cultural. Palace architecture, patronage of the arts, ballet and opera, rituals still celebrated in Russia and abroad. Former imperial theaters ring with music. Museum galleries shine with portraits and icons, and Fabergé eggs remain symbols of extravagant beauty. The traditions established by Romanov endowments live on in national institutions, echoing a time when a single family shaped the destiny of a civilization. Exile, however, proved unforgiving. Older generations of Romanovs struggled to accept their new reality. Some died in poverty, far from the splendor of home. The young adapted faster, founding businesses, engaging in politics, even returning to Russia in new roles decades later. The story of the last palace manager, a baron who once ruled over vast estates, ended in a modest Leningrad apartment with all his possessions valued at only a handful of rubles. A gem, portrait, or faded letter now constitutes the last tangible connection to the dynasty, a cultural and familial inheritance more meaningful than monetary wealth. In palaces, museums, auction houses, and whispered stories, the Romanov story continues. As fragments of their splendor draw fascination worldwide, the fate of their legacy is a testament to history's ability to preserve, transform, and retell the shadows of lost empires. The rise and fall of the Romanovs remains a powerful lesson on fortune's impermanence and the enduring allure of beauty, tradition, and myth. Conclusion: the arc of empire, memory, and legacy. The saga of the Romanov dynasty is not merely the chronicle of great rulers, golden palaces, or unmatched wealth. It is the living memory of a vanished world. For centuries, the family shaped the destiny of Russia, constructing a fortress of power, tradition, and luxury that stretched from the snow-clad palaces of St. Petersburg to the distant fields of Siberia. Their rise set the stage for cultural brilliance and economic might. Their grandeur became the heartbeat of Imperial Russia, mirrored in art, music, and national ritual. Yet the arc of their history, like all empires, bent toward tragedy and dispersal. Revolutions swept away centuries of certainty, scattering jewels and dreams across continents. The collapse of the monarchy was not just the end of privilege, but the fragmentation of a civilization. Treasures lost, palaces emptied, legacies rewritten. No vault or bank could shield the dynasty from the unpredictable tides of history. Even in exile, the remaining Romanovs learned to survive without grandeur, their myths preserved only in letters, relics, and faded photographs. But finality eludes memory. In today's museums, the glare of Fabergé eggs is joined by the quiet testimony of portraits, diaries, and family stories. Russian ballet and opera, once nurtured by imperial funds, enchant new generations. The Romanov legend, kept alive by curiosity and admiration, remains an enduring lesson. The wealth of a dynasty is as fleeting as history itself, but the beauty, culture, and memory seeded in their time continue to resonate far beyond the loss of empire. Thus, the story of the Romanovs stands as an epic of ambition, resilience, and transformation. Their fortunes, vast and impermanent, became the currency of myth, their culture the legacy of a civilization, and their loss a reminder that the heart of empire lingers not in gold, but in memory.